my wife manipulated me for years, until we realized the truth. Now she is looking for me, but it is too late. I don't know where to start. I don't know how I got to this point, but here I am, telling you my story, a story I never thought I would live, but that happened nonetheless. Maybe because I never imagined that someone could manipulate me in that way, that could make me believe that everything I did for her was not enough. But in the end, everything changed. I'll start from the beginning. I married Laura a few years ago, and back then I thought I'd found the woman of my dreams. She was everything I'd ever wanted, beautiful, smart, with that smile that could melt the coldest heart. But I never realized what was to come. At first, everything was perfect, or at least I thought so. I gave myself completely to her. I worked overtime, did everything she asked of me, provided for her in every way. I did it because I loved her deeply, because I believed that was what true love meant, sacrificing yourself for the person you loved most. Laura didn't work. She always had an excuse for not working. I don't feel well. I don't have the energy for it. It's not my thing. And I, like a fool, always gave her another excuse. I always believed her. My friends would say to me, "Hey, why are you working so much? Don't you realize that she's taking advantage of you?" And I, blinded by love, would tell them no, that it was okay, that she had the right to rest, that everything she did was for us. But all that only distanced me further and further from reality. Years went by and Laura still didn't do anything for herself, and I was increasingly exhausted. But you know what the worst thing is? Even though my life was falling apart, she never stopped asking me for more. Do this, go for that, work more hours. I want this, I want that. But it wasn't a please or an I would like to. It was more like an order disguised as a request, a need for control, to have everything without giving anything in return. One day, after working late, I came home and saw her sitting on the couch, staring at her phone like nothing mattered. My first instinct was to go make her some dinner, like always, but something stopped me. Something wasn't right. I don't know if it was her attitude or the way she looked at me, but in that instant, my world changed. Suddenly, a message on her phone flashed across the screen as the screen lit up. It wasn't a work message or a friend's. It was from a man. And the worst part of it all, she was saying things to him that she had never said to me. Things like, "I miss you, I hope to see you soon," and "This love has no end." My heart stopped. Couldn't believe it. Laura, my wife, had been cheating on me. While I was falling over myself for her, she was giving herself to someone else. I can't describe the anger, the pain, and the sadness I felt at that moment. My mind couldn't process it. Everything I had done for her, everything I had sacrificed, was worthless. And the worst thing was knowing that I had been being a fool, that I hadn't realized what was going on around me. I felt more alone than ever. I confronted her that same night, my heart pounding in my chest. I asked her directly about the message. At first, she denied it, tried to justify it, but little by little, the truth came out. She told me that she didn't love me anymore, that she didn't feel the same way about me anymore. It was like a stab in the chest, a fatal blow that I never saw coming. That's when I decided to do something I never thought I would do: leave her. I had reached my limit. I packed my things and left the house. I never wanted to see her again. And so, I was left alone, heartbroken, but also with a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. The days passed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. Yes, the pain was still there, but I felt stronger, as if the burden on my shoulders had been lightened. I began to rebuild my life little by little. I started to focus on myself, on regaining the peace I had lost for years. And most importantly, I realized what I had been doing wrong all this time. I had forgotten about myself to give everything to someone who didn't deserve it. But the story does not end here. The weeks after I left Laura were chaotic, but ones that helped me see things clearly. At first, I didn't know what to do with my life. I felt lost, like I had lost my way, but little by little I began to find purpose. I started hanging out with old friends, working out, picking up things I had put aside for years. My mind, for the first time in a long time, was clear. I was free. Free from the lies, the false promises, the manipulation. What shocked me the most was what happened when Laura realized I had made the decision to leave for real. The last time I saw her was when she came to pick me up from work. Her face was pale, the dark circles under her eyes, as if everything in her life was falling apart. Beside her, the man she had cheated on me with, a guy I had never met before, stood distant, as if he was also expecting the worst. But what hurt me the most wasn't seeing them together. It was the way Laura looked at me. There was no love in her eyes anymore. There was only regret. She told me I had made a mistake, that everything I had done was because I didn't know what I had, that I was confused. She asked me to come back, that everything would be different this time. But something inside me had already died. There was no love anymore. There was no room for forgiveness anymore. My life with her had been a lie, and I wasn't willing to go back to that reality. I just stared at her indifferently, something I never thought I would be capable of doing. The love I once felt for her was gone. In its place was something something stronger, respect for myself, for the man who had fought for her, for our relationship, but who had also been ignored and trampled on for far too long. I turned my back on her and walked away, never looking back. Soon after, Laura started calling insistently. Each time I picked up the phone, her voice sounded more broken, more desperate. I asked her to stop looking for me. I had come too late. Her regret was not enough to repair the damage she had caused me. Her messages turned into letters, the letters into email. She sent me pictures of the things she had promised to do if I came back, as if that would change what she had done. But in the end, all she had to offer me were empty promises. And then, the most unexpected moment came. A month later, I ran into her in a coffee shop. She was sitting alone at a table, looking at me with her eyes full of sadness. She stood up when she saw me enter, and before I could react, she was in front of me, begging me to listen to her. "Please, just listen to what I have to say," she said. I was so shocked that I didn't know what to do, but I agreed. Laura explained to me that the man she had cheated on me with was not what she had thought. He was just an escape, a way to fill the emptiness she felt inside of her. And after everything she had done, she now realized what she had lost. "I need you," she told me, with a sincerity I found hard to believe. "All I am now, all I have left is you. I promise I will change. I will do everything in my power to prove to you that I am worth it." But her words no longer touched me as they once did. There was no room in my heart for her anymore. What Laura didn't know, and what she couldn't even imagine, was that while she was busy ruining our relationship, I had changed completely. I was no longer the same man who sacrificed himself for her. I was no longer the man who put her above everything else. Now, I was a man who had rediscovered himself, who had rebuilt himself from the ground up. I no longer depended on anyone to make me feel complete. Laura begged me for hours. She cried. She showed me all her pain, but I no longer felt anything for her. When she realized that she could not get what she wanted, her attitude changed. The woman I once loved transformed into someone unrecognizable. She began to insult me, to blame me for everything. She told me that I was to blame for our relationship not working, that I had left her alone. But I no longer listened to her. I no longer cared what she said. The cruelest twist came when I learned that, after so much insistence, she had tried to get back into the life of her ex, the man she had cheated on me with. She had sought him out. She had called him. She had tried to rekindle that broken relationship, but the answer she received was even more devastating. He had rejected her. He didn't need her, and that was what destroyed her. At that moment, Laura realized that everything she had done to manipulate me, everything she had done to get what she wanted, had led her nowhere. But it was already too late. Laura's desperation reached a point where she could no longer hide it. She started showing up at my work, in the places I frequented, in my friendships, even on social media, sending messages with apologies, trying to convince me to help her out of the emotional storm she was in. But I was no longer the man she had known. The man who used to give in, who used to be her refuge, was gone. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call from my mother. "Your ex is in the hospital," she said in a shaky voice. My heart stopped for a moment. I didn't know if what I was hearing was real. Laura in the hospital? Why? First, I didn't know what to do, but something inside me told me I had to go, if only to close this page for good. I headed to the hospital, my thoughts a whirl. What could have happened to her? When I arrived, I saw her there, in a hospital bed, her face swollen, her eyes red from crying, and an expression that made me think she had realized what she had lost, what she had done. But the most shocking thing was not her appearance. What surprised me was the reason she was there. Laura had had such a huge emotional crisis that, in a fit of desperation, she tried to take an overdose of medication. The nurse explained to me that it was a failed attempt, fortunately. But what really broke my heart was what Laura told me when I entered the room. In a weak voice, she looked at me with eyes full of regret, and for the first time, I could see the vulnerability she had always denied me. "I never knew how much I loved you until it was too late. I understand now what I did, but I don't know what to do anymore. I don't know how to live with this anymore." It was like a stab in the chest, seeing the woman I once loved, the one who left me for another, the one who used me, completely broken in front of me. For a moment, my impulse was to stay by her side, hold her and comfort her. But my mind, my heart, was no longer with her. My instinct told me not to take that step. I asked her if she really understood the damage she had caused me, if she really realized how she had destroyed me. But what she answered left me speechless. "I didn't ask you to forgive me. I'm not asking you for anything. I just wanted you to know that I will always love you." And that was the last time I saw her. I never looked for her again. I never answered her messages again. That was the Laura who had created her own destiny and who had destroyed everything she had ever had in her grasp. There was no room for mercy anymore. anymore. There was nothing she could do to change the past. As she fell deeper into her emotional abyss, my life moved on. Not only had I distanced myself from her, but I had distanced myself from everything that relationship represented. The guilt, the despair, the fear of rejection. I realized that everything I had experienced with Laura was not love. It was an invisible chain that kept me prisoner, a lie that had made me believe that love was about excessive sacrifices, about suffering in silence for another's happiness. But the truth was that love, true love, should never hurt. Months later, I learned that Laura had left her hometown and moved somewhere else, trying to start over. I received a message from a mutual friend telling me that she had hit rock bottom. She had lost her job, her friends had abandoned her, and she had isolated herself from the world. The man she had cheated on me with never came looking for her again. And now, for the first time, she was facing the harsh reality. Everything she had ever wanted had fallen apart, and the one person who had always been there, willing to bear everything for her, was no longer in her life. But even as I heard all this, my heart no longer had room for pity. I realized that everything I had been through had not only taught me to be stronger, but also to realize what I deserve. I didn't deserve to live tied to someone who made me feel less than. I didn't deserve to be the emotional punching bag of someone who only saw me as a source of support for her, never giving anything in return. Time passed, and although Laura tried to contact me once more, I no longer cared. I had healed, I had left that shadow behind. I was not the same man who had met her. I had found my purpose, I had found my happiness again, and most importantly, I had learned to love myself. One day, while I was having coffee at a coffee shop with a friend, someone tapped me on the shoulder. I turned to see Laura. She was different, more mature, less vulnerable, but something in her eyes told me that she had learned an important lesson, one that she hadn't understood when we were together. "I've been looking for you all this time," she said, her voice cracking. "And even though I know I don't deserve your forgiveness or your time, I want to tell you that I will always love you, that I am grateful for everything you did for me. But I know that there is nothing left to do." I looked at her for a long moment, and that's when I realized something crucial. Her regret no longer meant anything to me. She no longer had power over my life. She could no longer manipulate me or make me feel guilty for her pain. My life was already in my hands, and I had decided not to let the past dictate my future. Laura's presence in front of me left me silent for a few seconds. I didn't know if I should feel compassion, if I should stay silent, or if I should just move on without saying another word. I was completely out of place, but she was still there, insisting that something could be done to fix things. It was then that, in a whisper that I almost didn't hear, she said to me, "I am pregnant." For a moment, the world stopped. The thought of being a father again, after everything that had happened, paralyzed me. My hands began to sweat, and for a moment, I didn't know what to do. How could this be? What did this mean for me, for her, for the life I had begun to rebuild? Laura, her eyes full of desperation, waited for me to react, but I just stared at her, trying to process what I had just heard. "Who is it from?" I asked, my voice shaking more than I wanted to admit. Her response was a heavy silence, as if she already knew what I was thinking. Finally, she said, "He's yours. He was always yours, Gonzalo. I know that everything I've done to you cannot be forgiven, but this son is not to blame for anything. He is the only reason I still have some hope left." My heart was pounding. How could I think of a child in the midst of so much chaos? How could I be responsible for something so big when everything in my life had been on the brink of ruin? She had destroyed our relationship, she had walked away from me, and now, somehow, she was asking me to help her get back what we had lost. "I'm sorry, Laura," I said with a calmness that surprised even me. "I'm not the man you need for this. I'm not the man who can save you now." Laura, as if it were her last hope, began to cry. Her tears fell as if she could no longer stop them. "Please, Gonzalo, do it for him. I don't want him to grow up without his father. I need you to be in his life." But as I looked at her, something inside me crumbled. I no longer felt anything for her, and although the thought of a child still haunted me, I couldn't fall into the same trap as before. I could no longer be the lifeguard for someone who had constantly drowned me. I turned my back on her, letting the weight of her words fade away. That child's future did not depend on my past decisions, but on the ones I would make now. However, Laura didn't give up. That same night, while I was trying to sleep, she called me again, this time in a much calmer tone of voice. "I understand you, Gonzalo. I know you're doing the right thing for yourself, but I want you to know something I've never told you before. I've always loved you, and now I know it more than ever. I'm letting you go because you deserve to be happy, but I don't want my son to grow up without knowing what his father meant to me, to us. I want you to know that you'll always be a part of my life, in some way, even if you don't want to anymore." He hung up before I could say anything. I was convinced that if he stayed in my life, I would only go in circles. His regret no longer changed anything. I could no longer be dragged into into that emotional spiral. Months passed. Laura tried to find me several times, and her pregnancy progressed. I learned from my mother, who kept me informed without wanting to pry too much, that Laura had given birth. A healthy boy, I was told. I never learned his name. I was never interested. But one day, I received a message from an unknown number. It was a video. I opened it without much hope, but what I saw left me cold. It was a video of Laura holding her son in her arms, looking directly into the camera. "This is your son," she said, her voice shaking, "and this is the only legacy I have left from you. Sometimes I think that everything that happened was a dream, and that I don't deserve anything that happened to me. But he needs to know who his father was." The image of that baby in her arms, so vulnerable, made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time, a need to protect. Somehow, I felt that this creature, even though a product of all the chaos, deserved better. But in that instant, I also knew that my life no longer belonged to Laura or her mistakes. My path was set, and although the responsibility of being a father would always be my path, my life was not going to be defined by the decisions of others. Over the next few days, uncertainty gripped me. Laura, in her desperation, had touched the most sensitive nerve I had, the father I always wanted to be. But my mind knew what my heart still didn't want to accept, that I couldn't go back to being the man she expected. There was no more room for sacrifice. But the most shocking thing of all came one morning when I received a letter on my doorstep. It was from Laura. This time, she didn't apologize or expect anything from me. There was just a single handwritten line. "I've given you everything I could, and now I'm letting you go. This is the end. Take care of yourself, Gonzalo." I stared at the letter for several minutes, almost as if the words would fade away or take on another meaning if I read them again. But they didn't. It was just there, crystal clear, like a final goodbye. There was no more room for regret, no more turns to take. Laura had done all she could, and so had I. All that was left was to move on, even if life had left me scarred. I took a couple of days to process it, to reflect on everything that had happened, but something inside me, something deeper, told me that I was ready to close the chapter. I didn't want to look back anymore. I didn't want to hold on to what could have been anymore, but to what I was about to be. A renewed man, stronger, more aware of his worth. The next day, I made a life-changing decision. I would sell the house I shared with Laura. There was no point in holding on to a place filled with memories that only hurt me anymore. That house represented my failure, my blind surrender. I needed to free myself from that bondage, and I did. I sold everything that was left of the life I shared with her. The money from the sale allowed me to move into a small but cozy apartment, far from the city, where I could start over. I didn't need luxuries, just peace. For weeks, I immersed myself in personal projects, began studying again, writing, teaching what I knew. My life began to take a direction I had never imagined, and best of all, I no longer felt the weight of past decisions. It was then that one day, while walking through the park with a cup of coffee in my hand, I came across something I hadn't expected. A little boy, no older than 8, running towards me with a ball. He smiled and, seeing me stumble and almost fall, burst into laughter that made the world, for a moment, stop again. Something in his laugh, something in his gaze made me remember Laura's son. I couldn't help but smile, as if everything I had lived through finally made sense. "Oops, sorry, sir," said the boy, embarrassed. "It's okay. It's nothing," I replied, regaining my balance. Seeing the boy's smile, I realized something. I, who had lost so much, had gained much more than I thought. I had rebuilt my life, learned to love myself, and let go of the past, not for Laura, but for me. And best of all, I now understood that self-love, inner peace, did not come from being tied to a past that no longer belonged to me. Back at my apartment, as I sat in front of the window, watching the sunset, I received a text. It was from an unknown number. I thought about ignoring it, but something made me open it. "I'm glad to know that you're okay, Gonzalo. I can finally tell you that I love you, but in the right way. Thank you for everything. This is the last message I send you." It was Laura, and although her message touched me, it no longer had power over me. There was no longer any resentment, no longer any pain. The story between us was already written, and what mattered now was what I was going to write in my own future. And for the first time in a long time, I could look at the horizon without fear, knowing that life had many more surprises ahead for me. And so, I closed the door on a chapter of my life that, although painful, had given me the tools to become the man I am today. At that moment, I understood that the scars of the past are not wounds that define us, but marks that teach us to be stronger.